a super interesting and challenging talk with the internationally worldwide well-known sustainability experts Hannah Eringhaus and Kai Schlegelmilch. We continue with sustainability and combine it with arts. Sebastian Copeland is an internationally renowned photographer, adventurer, and environmental activist who has dedicated his career to documenting the impact of climate change on polar region. I'm very happy to have you here. Welcome in our show, Sebastian.
Thank you, Anabel. It's a pleasure to be with you.
So I know that there is plenty of time we need normally to talk about your different parts of your life. And today we would like to focus a little bit on your not only photographs, which have graced the pages of National Geographic and exhibited in galleries worldwide, but are also kind of wake-up call. And you brought a wake-up call, your wake-up call with you, which was also printed as a book. I'm very happy that you did this because you combine in a way which is one of unique, not only the challenges everybody has to face, but the poles or between beautiness of nature and of course, that was happening is happening to the nature due to us, due to our hands. Maybe you can show us the book, the Arctic.
Okay. Yeah. So this is the latest book. It's called the Arctic, a darker shade of white, and it's it basically chronicles about 35 years of polar travel, and covers a variety of topics and geographies. And oh, is it upside down? It is upside down there. So anyhow, it's better to see in person, but it has a oh, that's interesting actually. The cover that they sent is upside down. That explains it. Anyhow, this is the book. There's a foreword by Jane Goodall, and and an essay in there by me that essentially does a 360 on the polar regions from its history, both in terms of paleoclimatology and then anthropology as well, and then more recently in its geopolitical implications.
Yeah, I would also say it's a kind of urgent call to action, your book. And I mean, you published it against the backdrop of that what you saw, and what you try to bring it into picture, and then you capture the stark beauty of the region while shedding light on its transformation due to climate change. And the Arctic, often seen as a pristine wilderness, is rapidly losing its icy mantle, affecting not only local ecosystems but the planet as a whole. With your lens, you give breathtaking landscapes and show them, but also the harsh reality of their disappearance. Have you felt last trip to the Arctic a very special urgency which brought you to the book, or what was the point of knowing the world needs this book urgently?
Well, I mean, any studies in climate transformations are, of course, measured against time. So you notice the transformations after multiple visits that are spread over a period of time. In my case, I've been traveling there for more than 30 years. So the incremental changes become much more noticeable when you compare them in decadal timescales. And just as strongly are the testimonials from the locals. And I spent a lot of time in northern Greenland lately, and it was in northern Canada before, but with Inuits and Inuguits and the tribes that have been living in these regions for thousands of years, and whose traditions and whose way of life is entirely dependent on the external conditions. So they have essentially shaped their protocols of survival relative to the conditions. It's beautiful. Of course, it's less beautiful when these protocols start to fall apart and along with it comes the influence of Western industries and not just remotely, but also locally. And so you can see progressively the breakdown of cultures that have been, that can be up to 35, 45,000 years old, which
Mhm.
is the time when populations move from Asia into the Arctic regions.
What do you think, Sebastian? Could we do as a society, as a Western society, to bring more attention to this? Because, I mean, your pictures are so challenging. Looking at your pictures should give us goosebumps and should give us the call to action to drive it to the better. What further do we need?
Well, look, to solve the culture war that exists between our outdated industrial world and nature,
Mhm.
there's multiple paths. But first, I think we need to celebrate the best of what is humanity and the best that is what is nature. And as far as us, I think that is vision, empathy, and innovation. It was Einstein, I think, who says that we're not going to solve today's problems by applying yesterday's solutions. And it seems to me that we are still very, very much working on a model that was defined by the Industrial Revolution and to a large extent is still the dominant mode of energy production. And so certainly, we have a lot of alternatives and luckily they are growing and these are good alternatives. But there's obviously a lack of economic and political commitment to scale that to where it needs to be in order to reach the targets that we all seem to be agreeing need to be reached, but do very little in order to get there.
Yeah, and by the question I told ask you about your which experience had the greatest impact on you in last year. You also mentioned the Ukraine's war. Um, how is it to look at this with the eyes of a photographer, but also with the eyes of somebody who likes to drive the world to the better, to see what a war like this moves with the country itself, with the people, with the nature, with values?
Right. So I mean the war machine is tragic on so many different fronts. You obviously have the human dimension, which is deplorable and
Mm,
graphically cruel. But you also have the destruction of many things. First of all, faith in institutions on the one hand, but
mhm,
nature as well. The one thing that we don't ever talk. We talk about the human toll, which is absolutely abhorrent. But there's also the toll on nature, and the displacement of emissions just from the war machine. But for me, 2024 was not just Ukraine. It's a 3-year conflict that is absolutely heartbreaking. But
yeah.
we saw similar type of tragedy develop in the Middle East,
Mhm,
and with just as much atrocities being shelled out on both sides. And then as well as that, we have this ongoing conflict in regions of Africa where the nature of famine is probably the greatest that it has been since the 1970s. And it is absolutely really immoral and hard to imagine how we could be there in 2024 with the resources that we have to actually produce excess food. But, we're on par to see 250 million people really at the border of what is humanly possible when it comes to survival. So 2024 has been a tough year, and I'm going to leave the
yeah.
US elections out of the conversation just for now. But this, of course, took a lot of oxygen out of other discussions, notably climate.
Yes, yes, exactly. Um, what was your most challenging experience in last year, if you look personally back?
Yeah, look, for me, and I lived for 40 years in the US. I'm English. I'm an English national and French, so I
Mhm,
have 3 passports. And but I have to admit that the most, and it's a again, it's a hard pick. I've just given you three instances which are absolutely, earth-shattering in their no, tragic implications. But looking at what a long-term implication is, and for me, what was probably the most emotionally difficult was the U.S. election,
Hmm.
because its implications have far-reaching consequences. It
Yeah.
somehow gives a green light. I always say that when the U.S. sneezes, the rest of the world gets the flu, and when you have
Yeah.
that level of disconnect
Hmm.
in what we had grown accustomed to, civil discourse, to we all understand that politics are corrupt, but there's
Yeah.
always been a curtain.
Yeah.
There's always been protocols that at least disguise it somehow. But when you see the sheer ugliness
Hmm.
of what has happened, and particularly the support, the popular support for it. And I don't blame the people. I,
Hmm.
I think that generally speaking, and this is a very important point in
Hmm.
this world that is so polarized and divided, is I really believe in the good of people. In fact, if you spend any time with the majority of people,
Yeah.
they will tend to be kind, empathetic, generous, but yet they're biased to politics that are abhorrent, and they
Hmm.
do so out of fear, right?
Hmm.
So we're in this world where now this prevalence of fear is leading people to make decisions that are a complete break from historical protocol.
Yeah.
And of course, there has been precedence. Of course, there always is precedence. And generally, that precedence has led us to some of the worst chapters in history.
Yeah, that's right. Um, you're believing in good. You're going to areas in the world where you take photographs to open the people the eyes. Um, what are your next plans for doing so to spread the word to the people?
I'm lucky that my work is entrenched in this discussion. So everything that I do in the end is messaging. There are
Yeah.
three drivers of transformation. You have policy, innovation, and marketing. I sort of end up in the marketing camp. I'm science trained, and of course, photography is nothing if not the best form of marketing because it informs a very, very precise moment in time, and it captures time, and God knows these times need to be captured. So I always say that beauty is the link that unifies us with nature, and it gives the arguments to commit the mind to a program of action. So with me, photography is a way really to transport this. And
Yeah.
when we fail to listen to nature, um, photography can make us hear with our eyes and draw that emotion in, and at least open a door to dialogue, to something that for many people may seem quite abstract. In the polar regions, to many people feel distant, in spite of the fact that they are the canary in the coal mine and should be considered to be, a harbinger and a cautionary tale.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. Going back to your book, because we are coming, unfortunately, today to an end. You said that Jane Goodall wrote the foreword in your book, and it's not just, I think, some ideas for driving the world a better place, what you have in common with her. She's exactly 30 years older than you, right? But there's much, much more to say when it comes to that, what brings you together. Do you want to share a few words of that with us?
Yes, well, Jane has always been a role model to me and to so many. I grew up with, reading. My mother was fond of her, and so as a child, I was aware of what her work on primates was, and she's always been a champion for the natural world. So she remains one of my hero. I'm so glad to have her grace the pages of my book.
Thank you so much, Sebastian. It was such a pleasure to have you here. We will have you in a couple of weeks here again, and I'm happy to talk further to you. Meanwhile, I wish you all the best for your trip, your current family trip, and hope that you have a lot of sun, good weather, and a lot of snow, of course. There, I want to thank you all for being part of today's episode of We Empower, the weekly radio show which is dedicated to celebrating the strength, resilience, and limitless potential of us, of human around the globe. Join us again next week as we continue on this empowering journey, sharing real stories of triumph, upliftment, and empowerment, what we can do in our daily lives to make a world and a planet a better place. So thank you very much for being part of our community. And until next time, keep shining and empowering others when whatever you do. Together we rise. Thank you very much for being here, listening, and taking part.
Thank you, Annabelle.